Jedediah Miller, known simply as Jed to the few friends he had, was a man of modest means and simple pleasures. He had spent most of his life riding the open plains, tending to cattle, and making a living the only way a cowboy in his part of the world knew how. He didn't own much, just his horse, his worn-out hat, and the clothes on his back. But Jed had a kind heart and a curiosity for life that often got him into the most unexpected situations. It was a hot afternoon, the kind where the sun seemed to beat down on the earth with unrelenting heat. Jed had finished a long day of rounding up stray cattle, his boots dusty and his throat parched. He walked into the local saloon, a wooden building that smelled of whiskey, sweat, and horse manure, hoping to find a cold drink and maybe some news about work. Inside, the air was thick with laughter and the occasional shout from men gambling at the tables. The saloon was a place where stories were shared freely, and sometimes fortunes changed in the blink of an eye. As Jed approached the bar, he noticed a small crowd gathered near the far end of the room. Curious, he made his way through the bustling space, his spurs clinking softly with each step. A man in a bright vest stood on a small wooden crate, waving a piece of paper in the air. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man shouted, his voice carrying over the din, "step right up. The grandest lottery this side of the territory. For only $5, one lucky man will win a chance at a bride." "That's right, a real marriage lottery." Jed paused, his brow furrowed in disbelief. He had heard of many strange things in his time, but a lottery for a bride? This was new, even for him. He listened as the man continued, explaining that a local reservation had agreed to participate in this unique event. The winner would have the right to meet and choose a bride from among the women who volunteered for the lottery. It sounded almost unbelievable, like something out of a story told around a campfire. Most of the men in the saloon laughed and shook their heads, some muttering that it was a fool's errand. But Jed's curiosity was piqued. He didn't have a fortune to spend, and marriage had never been high on his list of priorities, but there was something about the idea, the sheer randomness of it, the thrill of chance, that made him consider it. He dug into his pocket, counting his coins carefully. $5 was nearly everything he had, but he decided why not. Life was short, and sometimes you had to take a gamble. He handed the money to the man on the crate, who smiled broadly and tore a small ticket from the roll. "Here you go, sir," the man said, handing Jed the ticket. "Hold on to this. Your life might just change forever." Jed tucked the ticket into his worn coat pocket and took a deep breath. He didn't know what to expect, but a part of him felt a strange excitement. For the first time in a long while, he felt like life was offering him an adventure. He returned to his usual spot near the bar, ordered a cold drink, and tried to shake off the odd mix of anticipation and skepticism that had settled over him. The days that followed were filled with the usual work on the ranch, but Jed found his mind wandering to the lottery ticket in his pocket. He imagined the women he might meet, wondering what kind of person would be waiting for him at the other end of this strange arrangement. The idea of a bride chosen by chance seemed almost comical at times, but Jed couldn't help picturing what life might be like with someone new by his side. He chuckled at the thought, knowing full well that he had no idea what to expect. Finally, the day came when the winner of the lottery would be announced. The entire town seemed to buzz with excitement, and Jed found himself at the front of the crowd, ticket clutched tightly in his hand. The man in the bright vest stepped forward, raising his arms to quiet the murmuring crowd. With a dramatic pause, he unfolded a small piece of paper and read the name aloud. Jedediah Miller. A cheer erupted from the crowd, and Jed felt a mixture of shock and disbelief. Him? Out of all the men in the town, he had been chosen. He stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. The man handed him a small envelope, containing instructions on where to go and what to do next. Jed carefully read through the details, realizing that in just a few days, he would journey to the reservation to meet the woman he had technically won. The news spread quickly, and Jed soon found himself the center of attention. Friends and strangers alike approached him, offering advice, warnings, and good-natured jokes. Some laughed, saying he had better be ready for the shock of his life. Others spoke more seriously, reminding him that this was not just a game. It was a union that could last a lifetime. Jed listened, half amused and half thoughtful, understanding that he was about to step into something far larger than himself. As the day of the journey approached, Jed prepared as best as he could. He packed his belongings, made sure his horse was ready, and tried to steel himself for the unknown. He didn't know what awaited him on the reservation, and that uncertainty was both thrilling and terrifying. He had lived most of his life on the open plains, but this was a new kind of adventure, one that involved another person, another life, and the chance to build something entirely unexpected. The morning of the journey arrived with a soft, golden sunrise painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jed saddled his horse, took a deep breath, and set off toward the reservation. The wind carried the scent of grass and earth, and the world felt alive around him. Every step of the horse echoed the rhythm of his thoughts: excitement, fear, curiosity, and a strange sense of hope. As the miles passed, Jed's mind continued to wander. He thought about the women he might meet, wondering who she would be, what her life had been like, and how she would view him. He reminded himself that this was not just about chance, but about respect, understanding, and the possibility of building something real together. He had always been a practical man, but the lottery had stirred a dreamer within him, a side he rarely allowed to surface. Finally, as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land, Jed arrived at the outskirts of the reservation. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight before him. The air was filled with the sounds of life, children playing, animals moving, the distant chatter of voices. It was a world both familiar and foreign, a place of tradition and community. Jed felt a mixture of awe and humility, realizing that he was stepping into a space that was not entirely his own. He was met by a guide, a man who would lead him to the meeting place. Together they walked through the winding paths past homes and open fields until they reached a large clearing, and there, standing with a poise and presence that made Jed's breath catch, was the woman he had technically won, the bride who would change his life in ways he could not yet imagine. She was taller than anyone he had ever seen, strong and proud, her eyes steady and assessing. Jed felt a sudden wave of nervousness, realizing that this was no ordinary meeting. The lottery had brought them together, but now it was up to them to navigate the first steps of this unlikely journey. He tipped his hat respectfully, unsure of what words would be appropriate, and waited for her to speak. In that moment, surrounded by the vastness of the plains and the quiet strength of the reservation, Jed understood that his life had shifted in ways he could never have planned. The $5 lottery ticket had done more than buy him a chance at marriage. It had opened a door to a world of unknown possibilities, to a story that was only just beginning, and as he stood there, heart pounding and mind racing, Jed realized that sometimes the most unexpected turns in life could lead to the greatest adventures. Jed's heart thumped in his chest as he stood in the clearing, looking at the woman who had become the center of his world in a matter of moments. She was taller than he had imagined, her posture strong and straight, and her eyes sharp and clear, holding a quiet authority. Jed felt a mix of awe and nervousness. He had faced storms, wild horses, and cattle stampedes, but this, meeting the woman he was to marry, was a different kind of challenge. The woman stepped forward, her movements graceful yet deliberate. Her dark hair flowed over her shoulders, catching the sunlight, and she carried herself with confidence. Jed noticed her hands, calloused from work yet steady and skilled. She looked at him carefully, as if measuring his character, and then spoke, her voice firm but not unkind. "You must be the one who won the lottery," she said. Jed nodded, tipping his hat in respect. He realized quickly that words alone would not carry him through this encounter. He would have to rely on his actions, his manners, and his willingness to learn about her world. The guide who had brought him there gave a small nod and stepped aside, leaving Jed and the woman alone. The silence was filled with anticipation, each of them observing the other. Jed took a deep breath and tried to find something to say, but his thoughts raced. How does one start a conversation with someone you have never met? Someone who holds so much strength and presence. I am Jed, he finally managed, his voice low but steady. I don't know much about this, but I'm willing to learn. The woman's lips curved into a faint smile, and she inclined her head slightly. I am Nayeli, she said. You have come a long way for this meeting. That shows determination, at least. Jed felt a bit of relief at her words. He realized that this was not just about luck. This was about respect, about proving that he was more than just a man who had thrown coins into a hat. He had to show he could understand and adapt to her life, and in turn, he hoped she would see the person he truly was. Nayeli led Jed through the reservation. pointing out the various homes, communal spaces, and areas where the community gathered. Along the way, she spoke of the land, the traditions, and the ways her people lived. Jed listened intently, absorbing every detail, aware that he was stepping into a world far different from the open plains he knew so well. As they walked, Jed tried to keep pace with her, but it became clear that she was faster and more agile than he anticipated. Her steps were confident, and she seemed at ease in her surroundings. Jed struggled not to fall behind, feeling a mix of embarrassment and admiration. He realized that Niley's life was filled with skills and strength that he had never encountered, and he was determined to respect that. They arrived at a small clearing near a stream, where children were playing and women were tending to chores. Niley paused and gestured for Jed to sit. He obeyed, taking a spot on a smooth rock near the water. The children glanced at him curiously but continued their play, and the women gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Jed felt the weight of observation but tried to remain calm. Nayeli began to speak, telling stories of her family, of the land, and of the lessons she had learned growing up. Jed listened with rapt attention, fascinated by her tales of survival, courage, and wisdom. He realized that she had experienced hardships and triumphs that were beyond anything he had faced, and he felt a growing respect for her resilience and strength. In turn, Jed shared bits of his own life, the long days on the plains, the cattle drives, and the simple pleasures of riding through open fields. He spoke of his dreams, his fears, and the moments that had shaped him into the man he was. Nayeli listened with quiet interest, occasionally asking questions that challenged him to think deeper about his experiences and choices. As the day went on, Jed began to notice the subtle ways in which Nayeli moved and interacted with the world. She had a keen sense of awareness, noticing things he might have missed. She could read the land, the animals, and the people around her with ease. Jed realized that he had much to learn, and the thought did not intimidate him. It intrigued him. He wanted to understand her world fully, to earn her trust, and perhaps in time to find a place within it. By late afternoon, the sun had begun its descent, casting a warm glow over the land. Nayeli suggested they try a simple task together, gathering wood for the evening fire. Jed followed her instructions carefully, observing how she worked with efficiency and skill. He fumbled at first, struggling to match her pace, but she was patient, offering guidance without condescension. It was in these small moments that Jed began to feel a connection, a shared rhythm forming between them. After the wood was gathered, they returned to the clearing, and Nayeli prepared a small meal. Jed watched, impressed by her resourcefulness and knowledge. She moved with a natural grace, turning simple ingredients into a nourishing meal. Jed offered to help, chopping vegetables and tending the fire under her watchful eye. Together, they created a modest but satisfying meal. And as they ate, the conversation continued, stories, laughter, and questions weaving a thread of understanding between them. As the evening grew darker, Jed noticed the stars emerging in the clear sky above. He felt a sense of wonder, realizing that this day, which had begun with uncertainty and nerves, had transformed into something meaningful. Nayeli's presence had challenged him, intrigued him, and inspired him to think beyond himself. He understood that their meeting was not about the lottery, the prize, or chance. It was about discovery, learning, and the potential for a connection that transcended expectations. Before parting for the night, Nayeli spoke quietly. "You have shown patience and respect today. That is more than many could do. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, and we will see if your determination holds." Jed nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but he was willing to face it. The day had taught him that strength came in many forms, and that understanding someone else's world required effort, empathy, and patience. He returned to the small place where he would stay for the night, his mind alive with thoughts of what lay ahead. As he lay down to rest, Jed thought about the strange twists of fate that had led him here. A simple $5 lottery ticket had brought him into a world he could never have imagined, and he felt both excitement and responsibility. He understood that Nayeli was not a prize to be won, but a person with her own life, skills, and wisdom. And in that realization, Jed felt a deeper sense of purpose, to approach this experience with respect, humility, and a genuine desire to learn. The night passed quietly, filled with the sounds of the land, crickets, the rustle of trees, and the distant call of animals. Jed slept with one eye open, not out of fear, but from anticipation. He was eager to see what the next day would bring, what lessons he would learn, and how the bond between him and Nayeli might grow. When the morning light spilled over the horizon, Jed rose with renewed determination. He greeted Nayeli with a respectful nod, ready to continue the journey that had begun the day before. Together, they would navigate the challenges, the discoveries, and the moments of connection that awaited them. And Jed knew that whatever happened, he had already begun to change, growing into a man who understood that life's most unexpected turns often led to the richest experiences. The following morning, Jed woke to the sound of birds calling and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. He stretched, feeling the ache in his muscles from the day before, and remembered the lessons he had already begun to learn. Life with Nayeli would not be simple. It would challenge him in ways he had never imagined, but he welcomed it because he knew that growth often came from difficulty. After a quick breakfast of bread and roasted meat, Nayeli suggested they begin their work for the day. She spoke with calm authority, and Jed could sense that this would not be a day of idle conversation. She had planned a series of tasks that would teach him about her world, about the land, and about the responsibilities she held. Jed followed her closely, determined to match her pace even though he knew he would stumble at times. Their first task involved tending to the animals in the nearby paddock. Jed had experience with horses and cattle, but he quickly realized that Nayeli's methods were precise and different from what he knew. She had a way of moving that was both efficient and graceful, guiding the animals without raising her voice, using subtle gestures and keen observation. Jed tried to follow her example, mimicking her movements, and he found himself learning faster than he had anticipated. "Watch the way they respond," Nayeli instructed, her tone patient. "You cannot force them. You must understand them." Jed nodded, absorbing the lesson. He could feel the animals' movements and emotions in ways he had never noticed before. It was not just about control or dominance. It was about connection and awareness. He began to appreciate the depth of Nayeli's knowledge and the respect she had earned from her community. After the morning work, they paused for a short rest. Jed sat on a large rock, wiping the sweat from his brow, and watched Nayeli as she carefully repaired a worn saddle. Her hands moved with skill and confidence, and he realized that everything she did was precise and deliberate. He felt a growing admiration for her, not just for her strength, but for the way she carried herself with dignity and purpose. As they continued through the day, Nayeli introduced Jed to more of the community's routines. He helped gather water from the stream, observed the women as they prepared food, and listened to the elders share stories of the land and their ancestors. Jed tried to participate fully, asking questions when appropriate and listening with respect. He was careful to remember that he was a guest in this world, and he wanted to show that he was willing to learn rather than impose his own ways. At midday, Nayeli suggested they practice tracking in the fields beyond the reservation. Jed had experience with horses, but he had rarely tracked animals in the wild with such focus. Nayeli showed him how to observe subtle signs, broken twigs, footprints, disturbed soil. She explained how the land told stories, how every movement of an animal left a trail, and how understanding those trails could mean the difference between success and failure in hunting. Jed struggled at first, missing clues and misreading signs. Nayeli was patient, pointing out errors without scolding, letting him see the correct approach. Gradually, Jed began to notice the small details, the patterns in the grass and soil, the way birds reacted to movement, the scent of the wind. It was exhausting work, but he felt a sense of accomplishment each time he correctly identified a track. He realized that patience and observation were as important as strength and skill. By late afternoon, they returned to the clearing, tired but satisfied. Jed felt a sense of connection to the land that he had never experienced before. He began to understand that Nayeli's life was shaped by knowledge passed down through generations, knowledge that demanded respect and careful attention. He realized that if he wanted to be a part of this world, he needed to embrace these lessons fully. As they sat by the stream, washing their hands and preparing for the evening meal, Nayeli spoke quietly about her life and the challenges she had faced. Jed listened intently, realizing that her strength came not just from physical ability but from resilience, intelligence, and courage. She had faced hardships, loss, and responsibility from a young age, and she had emerged wiser and stronger because of it. I have seen many people come and go, Nayeli said, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. Few have the patience to understand the ways of this land. It is not easy, but those who do find something precious. Jed nodded, feeling a deep respect for her words. He understood that the lottery ticket had brought him here. But it was his actions, his willingness to learn and adapt, that would determine his place in this world. He felt a sense of responsibility, not just to Nayeli, but to the community and the land they lived on. The evening was spent around the fire, sharing stories and observing the stars as they appeared one by one. Jed began to feel a sense of peace and belonging, even though he knew there were many challenges still ahead. He had begun to understand that building trust and connection required patience, humility, and consistent effort. As night fell, Jed reflected on the day. Every task, every lesson, every observation had brought him closer to understanding Nayeli and her world. He felt a growing admiration for her strength and wisdom, and a determination to prove that he could be a worthy partner. He knew that this journey was not just about a lottery win. It was about learning, growth, and the possibility of something meaningful. He lay down to rest, listening to the sounds of the land, the whisper of the wind, the distant call of animals, and the quiet hum of life in the reservation. Jed realized that he had already begun to change. The lessons of the day had opened his mind, expanded his understanding, and sparked a sense of purpose he had never known before. He felt ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, knowing that with patience, respect, and determination, he could navigate this new life with Nayeli by his side. The night passed with quiet reflection, and when the first light of dawn appeared, Jed rose with renewed determination. He knew that the path ahead would be filled with trials and discoveries, but he felt confident in his ability to adapt and learn. Nayeli had shown him the depth of her world, and he was ready to meet it with an open heart and a willing spirit. As he prepared for the day, Jed felt a sense of anticipation and excitement. He knew that the lessons of yesterday were only the beginning, and that each day would bring new challenges and opportunities to grow. With Nayeli guiding him and the land teaching him, Jed understood that he was embarking on a journey that would shape him in ways he could not yet imagine. And he welcomed it, knowing that true understanding and connection required effort, patience, and an open mind. The morning light filtered softly through the trees, casting a gentle glow over the clearing where Jed prepared for another day with Nayeli. He felt a growing sense of anticipation, understanding that each day was an opportunity to learn more about her world, her ways, and the land they both shared. The experiences of the previous days had already begun to shape him, and he was eager to see what new lessons awaited. Nayeli greeted him with a nod, her expression calm but filled with quiet determination. She handed him a bundle of supplies and gestured toward the distant hills. Jed followed, keeping pace as best he could. Today's tasks were different. They would involve helping with the community's gardens, gathering medicinal herbs, and understanding the natural remedies Nayeli and her people relied on. Jed realized that life here was not only about strength and skill, but also about patience, observation, and a deep respect for the balance of nature. As they walked, Nayeli explained the importance of each plant and herb they would encounter. Jed listened closely, repeating the names and uses to himself, trying to memorize the details. He was careful to note the way she handled each plant, gently removing leaves, checking for freshness, and using her senses to determine quality. It was meticulous work, and he quickly learned that carelessness could ruin the harvest. They spent the morning moving through the garden and surrounding fields, Jed learning the rhythm of the land, the seasons, and the subtle signs that indicated growth, ripeness, or need for attention. Nayeli worked alongside him, guiding his hands, correcting his movements when necessary, and praising his effort when he succeeded. Jed felt a mixture of pride and humility. He was learning to respect not only her knowledge but also the patience and dedication it took to maintain harmony with the land. Around midday, they paused by a small stream to rest and drink. The water was clear and cool, and Jed took a moment to reflect on how different life was here. The open plains he had known were vast and untamed, but this land had a quiet order and balance that demanded understanding. Nayeli sat beside him, her presence steady and reassuring, and Jed realized that their connection was growing, not just through shared work but through mutual respect and patience. After their break, Nayeli led Jed into the forest to gather specific herbs used for treating minor injuries and ailments. She demonstrated how to identify the plants, how to harvest them without damaging the surrounding growth, and how to prepare them for use. Jed tried to replicate her movements, carefully following her instructions, and gradually began to understand the subtle techniques that had taken her years to master. He felt a sense of accomplishment each time he correctly identified a plant or prepared it properly. As they worked, they shared stories and observations about their lives. Nayeli spoke of the elders, of the traditions passed down through generations, and of the importance of understanding one's role within the community. Jed shared tales of life on the plains, the long hours spent with cattle, the camaraderie of fellow cowboys, and the lessons he had learned from hardship and persistence. Each story, each detail, helped bridge the gap between their worlds, creating a bond based on curiosity, respect, and shared experience. By late afternoon, they returned to the clearing, carrying the fruits of their labor. Nayeli began preparing remedies and teaching Jed how to apply them, emphasizing the importance of precision and care. Jed followed her instructions diligently, realizing that even small mistakes could have consequences. He admired her focus and skill, and he felt grateful for her patience in guiding him through the complexities of her knowledge. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Nayeli suggested they take a ride through the hills on horseback. Jed eagerly accepted, knowing that this was both a test of skill and a moment of connection. He mounted his horse, adjusting the reins and saddle, while Nayeli moved with the ease of someone who had ridden these lands countless times. They rode side by side, moving through the rolling hills, feeling the wind against their faces and the rhythm of the horses beneath them. The ride offered moments of quiet reflection. Jed marveled at the way Nayeli moved with confidence and grace, guiding her horse effortlessly through the terrain. He felt a sense of unity with her, the horses and the land, realizing that the shared experience was deepening their bond. The challenges of the day, the lessons learned, and the trust required to work and ride together were all shaping their connection in ways that words alone could not capture. When they returned, the evening was settling in, casting long shadows across the clearing. Nayeli prepared a modest meal and Jed helped where he could, chopping wood and tending the fire. The act of working together, of contributing to the small tasks that sustained their day, strengthened Jed's understanding of partnership and shared responsibility. He realized that marriage in this context was not about grand gestures, but about daily efforts, mutual support, and respect for each other's skills and knowledge. After the meal, they sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the sounds of the land. Jed felt a sense of calm and belonging, understanding that their connection was built not only on shared tasks, but on patience, observation, and the willingness to learn from one another. He reflected on how far he had come since the day he first arrived, how much he had learned, and how much more there was still to understand. Nayeli spoke quietly about the importance of trust and communication, emphasizing that true partnership required openness and honesty. Jed listened intently, realizing that these lessons were as vital as any skill he had learned that day. He knew that the journey ahead would continue to test his patience, adaptability, and empathy, but he felt ready to face it, knowing that growth and understanding came through effort and attentiveness. As night fell, Jed lay down to rest, feeling the satisfaction of a day well spent and the anticipation of what the next day would bring. He knew that the path ahead was filled with challenges, but he was committed to learning, growing, and deepening his connection with Nayeli. The lessons of the day had reinforced the importance of respect, patience, and shared effort, and he felt a sense of purpose and determination that had been missing from his life before. The night was quiet, filled with the gentle sounds of the land, and Jed drifted into sleep with thoughts of the day's experiences and the knowledge that each moment spent with Nayeli was shaping him in ways he had never expected. He understood that this journey was not simply about winning a lottery or fulfilling an obligation. It was about building a connection, learning, and embracing the challenges and rewards of partnership. As the first light of dawn appeared, Jed rose with renewed resolve. He greeted Nayeli with respect and gratitude, ready to continue the journey that had already begun to transform his life. He knew that each day would bring new lessons, new challenges, and opportunities to grow, and he welcomed them with an open heart, and a willing spirit. The bond between him and Nayeli was developing steadily, built on mutual understanding, effort, and the shared experiences that connected them more deeply than words could convey. The days turned into weeks, and Jed found himself increasingly at ease in the world that Nayeli had shared with him. He had grown stronger, wiser, and more attentive to the rhythms of the land. The initial shock and intimidation he had felt when he first saw Nayeli, so tall and commanding, had transformed into admiration and a quiet sense of companionship. He no longer viewed the lottery as a simple twist of fate. It was the start of something far deeper, something that had changed the course of his life. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Jed and Nayeli set out together to check on the cattle grazing in the distant fields. Jed had become familiar with Nayeli's methods and her careful way of observing the animals and the land. He moved alongside her, quietly noting every detail, learning to anticipate what she might do and trying to mirror her patience and understanding. It was not easy, but with each step he felt more connected to her, the land, and the animals that depended on them. As they worked, Nayeli spoke of her hopes for the future, for the community, and for the life she wished to build. Jed listened closely, realizing that her visions were practical yet filled with wisdom. He shared his own thoughts, ideas, and dreams, feeling more confident that his voice mattered and that his experiences could complement hers. They spoke openly, learning from each other and slowly building a mutual trust that went beyond words. Later that afternoon, they returned to the reservation, where the community was busy with daily life. Jed had begun to recognize the rhythm of the people here, their work, their stories, and their traditions. He no longer felt like an outsider. Instead, he was part of the shared effort, helping where he could, observing when he should, and offering respect and support at every turn. The lessons Nayeli had taught him had become ingrained, and he saw the value of patience, understanding, and collaboration in everything they did. Jed and Nayeli spent time working side by side in the fields, tending to the crops and gathering firewood. Jed's confidence grew, not just in his ability to perform the tasks, but in his understanding of the world Nayeli had shared with him. He realized that their bond was being built on more than just daily chores. It was rooted in shared effort, respect, and the small moments of learning and laughter that made life meaningful. As the day faded into evening, they prepared a meal together. The simple act of cooking and sharing food became a ritual, a space where they could talk, laugh, and enjoy each other's company. Jed marveled at Nayeli's skill, not just in the work she did, but in the way she carried herself with calm strength and quiet humor. He felt a growing sense of partnership, knowing that their relationship was built on understanding, trust, and the shared experiences that made them stronger together. After the meal, they sat outside watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. Jed reflected on how far he had come since the day he first arrived, how much he had learned and how much more he still had to discover. He understood that Nayeli had opened a world to him, a world that required respect, effort, and attentiveness, and he felt grateful for her guidance and patience. Nayeli spoke softly, recounting stories of her ancestors, their struggles, triumphs, and wisdom. Jed listened with fascination, realizing that these stories carried lessons far beyond the surface. They were about resilience, understanding, and the importance of living in harmony with the land and community. He felt honored to hear them and understood that being part of this world required more than skill. It required heart and empathy. The weeks passed and Jed began to feel a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. He had learned the ways of the land, the traditions of the community, and the depth of Nayeli's strength and wisdom. Their bond had grown into something genuine, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and a growing affection that neither could ignore. One afternoon, as they rode through the hills, Jed realized how natural it felt to be beside Nayeli, sharing tasks and stories, navigating challenges, and celebrating small victories together. He understood that this connection was rare, something earned through patience, effort, and understanding. He felt a quiet pride, not in conquering or winning, but in becoming a part of something larger than himself. They returned to the reservation, where the community welcomed them warmly. Jed had earned their respect through his willingness to learn, his humility, and his consistent efforts to contribute. He felt a sense of acceptance and belonging, understanding that he had not only adapted to this world, but had become a part of it. As the sun set, Casting a golden light over the land, Jed and Nayeli walked together to the stream. They paused, watching the reflection of the sky and the water, feeling the cool breeze on their faces. Jed felt a profound sense of gratitude, realizing that the lottery ticket, the chance encounter, and the journey they had shared had led to something far more meaningful than he could have imagined. Nayeli looked at him, her expression calm and thoughtful. "You have learned much and you have shown patience and respect," she said. "That is more than many could do." Jed smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "And I have learned from you," he replied. "You have taught me to see the world differently, to listen, to observe, and to respect. I am grateful for that, and I hope to continue learning every day." They sat together in silence for a while, feeling the connection between them, the unspoken understanding, and the shared experiences that had brought them to this point. Jed realized that the journey was not over. It was ongoing, filled with challenges, discoveries, and opportunities to grow together. But he felt ready, confident that with patience, respect, and love they could face anything. The following days were filled with more work, learning, and shared moments. Jed and Nayeli continued to support each other, growing stronger as individuals and as partners. They faced challenges with resilience, celebrated small victories, and deepened their understanding of each other and the world around them. Jed felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known, a sense of purpose and belonging that went beyond his wildest dreams. One evening, as they watched the sunset from a hilltop, Jed reflected on the incredible journey he had taken. From a simple $5 lottery ticket to standing beside Nayeli, learning, growing, and building a life together, he marveled at the twists of fate and the lessons he had learned. He understood that life was full of unexpected turns, and sometimes the greatest adventures came from the most unlikely beginnings. Nayeli reached out, taking his hand, and Jed felt a surge of gratitude and connection. He realized that their bond was built not just on circumstance, but on shared effort, respect, and the willingness to understand and support each other. It was a partnership that had grown naturally, rooted in trust, patience, and genuine care. As night fell, they returned to the reservation, where the community carried on with their lives. Jed felt a sense of belonging, knowing that he had earned his place and that his connection with Nayeli was genuine and strong. He understood that the journey ahead would continue to test them, but he was confident in their ability to face it together. Lying down that night, Jed thought about the path that had brought him here. The lottery had been the first step, but it was the lessons, experiences, and moments shared with Nayeli that had truly transformed his life. He felt a sense of peace and anticipation for the future, knowing that their story was only just beginning, and that each day would offer new opportunities to learn, grow, and strengthen their bond. In the weeks and months that followed, Jed and Nayeli continued to build their life together. They faced challenges with determination, celebrated successes with joy, and supported each other through every twist of fate. Jed realized that the true reward of the lottery was not a bride or a prize, but the journey itself, the chance to connect, to learn, and to grow alongside someone extraordinary. And so, Jed's life, once simple and predictable, became rich with meaning, partnership, and adventure. The $5 lottery ticket that had started it all was no longer a symbol of chance, but a reminder that unexpected opportunities could lead to the most profound experiences. With Nayeli by his side, Jed embraced the future with confidence, knowing that together, they could navigate any challenge and create a life filled with respect, understanding, and love.